welcome to another Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. And this is a special one. Why is this special? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Number one, it's a Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. Number two, it's New Year's Eve. I hope you're getting ready for the end of the year. Number three, I'm continuing on with my Kilroy's Key 3 new to me for 2022. And hopefully, we're going to get all the videos I plan to try to do before the end of the year. We'll see. And not to be, don't want to overpromise, but this might be a triple feature today. We'll just have to see how today goes. And today, we're continuing on again with the Kilroy's Key 3, new to me. Today is Sci-Fi. We're going to look at the top 3 sci-fi games that were new to me in 2022. And I think you're going to like some of these. There's some interesting ones here. So let's without further ado, let's take a look at what we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about Star Wars: The Clone Wars. This is part of the pandemic system. We're going to talk about For What Remains, and this is actually several games. Each one had 2 factions, but they were all standalone, or you can combine them. They include Blood on the Rails and Out of the Basement, which I need to thank DBG for those. This was Streets of Ruins, which was the first one that I picked up. And then the third game I'd like to talk about that made my top 3 was Space Infantry Federation from Lock and Load. This is from Lock and Load, this is from Z-Man, this is from DVG. The Space Infantry Federation, I picked that up as part of Lock and Load's holiday sale, and this actually could have made it, or probably should have made it into my top solo games. Arguably top solo war games or top solo non-war games, but I saved it for top sci-fi just so we didn't have too much crossover. So with these 3 games making it to the top, I always kind of try, or at least as part of the Kilroy's Key 3, I'm trying to do my point of view, which is presentation, operation, and value. And so I tend to start with the boards or the maps or the components as far as the presentation is concerned. So let's dive into that. As you can see here, for presentation purposes, this is just a sample of For What Remains, some of the boards. You get these two-sided grid type boards that have a kind of a post-apocalyptic landscape, and there's several that come in each of those 3 sets. That I think there's only 3 sets for this game, although I think there is a bonus package that you can buy of these tiles if you want to add on to it. But it's a scenario-based system where you can lay out the tiles based on the scenario, or you can make up your own scenarios and use whatever tiles you want. And they basically represent, I think there's like 3 different types of terrain. And this is really a very tactical game and almost very much almost a miniatures. It's not miniatures, it uses counters, but it feels like a miniatures game. I mean, some of the counters that you get in here these are the extra big counters. Then you got the smaller counters there. But it's got a very, very, how many varies are there? It has a unique command system where you're drawing chits out of a bag to have your units go forward, and your units have different abilities depending on their level. There's recruit, veteran, and elite, and depending on the scenario, or if you want to play a campaign game, you can advance these up to the elite status, and their move and their abilities change depending upon what level. And the way you keep track of their levels is you put an extra counter on there. So if you have an elite, you're going to have 3 counters in your stack for that unit. Let's say, for example, this rebel leader, you'd have 3 counters. And that's also its health as well. So when you attack, when it takes damage, you'll flip it. And then if it takes another damage, you take the counter away. And then eventually you can get it down to it's off the board. But there's a lot of dice rolling in this game. You are the combat values are the number of dice you roll, but there's also, there's line of sight, there's range, there's all the kind of elements that you would have for a tactical game or a miniatures game come to life in For What Remains. This was designed by David Thompson. Covered a few games of his over time. So for presentation value, the counters are nice. They're typical DVG, thick counters, not a lot of text on it. You basically just need to know the unit name, its level, whether it's veteran or elite or what have you. And then it might have like a symbol on it. If there's multiples of that, you might have to, you have to delineate them by a symbol. But this is the map board. I mean, it's usually a, I think a 9 square grid for the map boards when you play them out. But so that's the presentation of For What Remains. And again, each one of those 3 boxes have unique factions in them, but they all have unique tiles or terrain in them, but also unique factions and a unique campaign system. But you can interchange those units and do your own scenarios. The next one I'd like to talk about is Space Infantry Federation. This is basically a States of Siege type game. It comes in a bag, and at least my version came in a bag. I don't know if it ever came in a boxed edition, but most of the components are, it's not regular paper, but it's not super thick paper. But this is the game. This is the game map. As you can see, it kind of has a States of Siege type feel to it. You have these tracks where the enemy aliens are converging on your home planet, and you're trying to fight them off. And actually, you're trying to not only keep them back, but you're also trying to go out and conquer worlds in their sectors as well. And this chart also keeps track of their forces that are coming out, and also their technologies that they're acquiring. And there's the way you win the game is by controlling a certain number of their worlds and their sectors. They win if they ever attack Seoul, but they also win if they fill up their technology trees or technology tracks as well. So this takes up quite a bit of space, because all these boards, this reference you don't necessarily need to have on the board. You just refer to that. But this event board is out there because there's unique events that take place. There's this map board, which is the main board that you're going to be playing off of and keep track of where you're advancing as far as your conquest. This board right here is kind of your politics. There's a whole political element to this, and shows where you stand vis-a-vis the different factions. And then the war effort, these kind of interact in that, when you start off the game, mercenaries are at war with you. They're at total war. These other ones are at peace, but this might change over time, and that might ramp up their ability when you draw chits out of the bag. This is a chit pool game where you're going to be drawing chits, and then that will tell them what to do on the different tracks. Then you also have this research track. This is where you're getting your resources and trying to collect them to do certain things on your turn and unlock special assets, and then also doing research. You can research certain technologies, and then this is the track. You roll a dice and see how far they advance on that. So all these go on the board at the same time as the main map, and they're decent thickness, not super thick, but not mounted, and all those will go on the board as well as you play the game. The counters in this game are good. They're thick. I mean, they're lock and load type counters, so they're a good thickness. You don't really need to clip them. They kind of come out pretty clean. And I supplied my own dice there, but decent counters, and enough of a description of the icon so you know what you're doing there. The third game I'd like to talk about is the Star Wars Clone Wars. This one is part of the Pandemic system, which, if you're not familiar, I've done a few videos on Pandemic and talked about that whole system, but the pandemic system owes its name to the game Pandemic that came out several years ago, pre-COVID, but it is a cooperative game that you can play solo as well, but it's a cooperative game where you're all trying to race against time to get the cures for all the different diseases. This is a little bit different. This is taking it to the Clone Wars world, and you are the kind of the Jedi that are fighting against the expanse of the Empire in this period of the Clone Wars. The art is fine. I mean, this is evocative of the of the animated series. I think a little bit of kind of a combination there of the animated and the some of the live action stuff. This is your map board. The art's fine on it. It's mounted. There's not a lot. These connections are important because that's how you move through the system, but it doesn't jump out at you. I mean, I guess it's the presentation is fine for what it is. You've got your threat level and your invasion level. Those are common elements in a pandemic game that's going to ramp up the severity of how you go through the game. The other components that come in the game, you've got some minis. Now, these are just mainly markers in the game. They're going to be moving around on the different planets, but there's not. I mean, they're fine, right? I mean, it's not something that is essential to the game, but it does add to the whole visibility of the game or the appeal, the visual appeal of the game. You've got this is basically a card-based game. There's going to be several cards that there's going to be certain missions that you're trying to accomplish, that you need to travel to certain areas, and then you're going to be getting cards that help you accomplish those tasks during the game. And the card quality is fine. I mean, it's not. I mean, they're fine. They're not super thick, but they're not. There's a little bit of a linen finish on it. But you're basically matching, suits of sort together to do certain things. Like, the blue let you move, and then you're matching up the purple or the red for different combat. But it's kind of a set collection game, which is kind of consistent for all pandemic type games. The art is fine. I mean, the art is it's not live action stuff, but it's I think the art comes off nice, as you can see in there. So production on this is very good. There's also I kind of got them buried here in this box here, so always look inside the underneath the boxes. But you get your these came as a bonus, but you got your little droids that are basically the enemy, and in like pandemic, it's the diseases or the virus that are spreading. In this game, these are what are spreading from planet to planet and trying to take over stuff. And you have to spend some time taking these out, but also trying to accomplish your missions and fighting these ultimate villains. Some of the bad guys here, like General Grievous and the like, Darth Maul. You're having to fight the bad guys in this as well. And then that's usually kind of the end thing you have to do is clear a path, get to the bad guy, and do enough missions so you've got enough to where you can take out the bad guy and fight them. Each game is kind of based on who you're fighting, right? You're going to pick a different one for each game that you have there. So going back to the tote board, so to speak, of what how do these fare for presentation value. Time to get out the keys of Kilroy's Key 3. I would say that the Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I mean, it's a more of a produced game. It's a lot more production value that went into that, and it also benefits from the IP. I would give it 3 on that scale. I would give For What Remains 2, and I would give Space Infantry 1, and that's just really for the production of it. It's very functional and very usable, but there's a little bit more attention to the cards and the counters in For What Remains in that regard. Next, we go to operation, which is the rules of the game. How well does it play? How well does it? What's the ease of play? Are there player aids that help you in play? If it's simulating something, does it do a good job of, the rules help in understanding that simulation, or how it does simulate the event. And in this case, this one was all three of these took a little bit of, okay, that's what we're doing, right? This was probably the easiest one of the three, followed by, strangely enough, For What Remains, and then thirdly by Space Infantry. Space Infantry is not complex, but it just took a little bit to figure out what all those different things, how all those things are interacting. Once you understand the icons on the chits that you're pulling, that game goes really quick and is easy to replay. For What Remains is a very simple system, but it has some really interesting aspects, especially its ability to be solitaire. It's got its own built-in solitaire system. It's not one of those, you got to play this two-handed. It has a whole system of how you pull out commands and what the enemy is going to do, and it's got its own unique orders for each one of those enemies on what they're doing. And so that that attention to detail on the solo play, I thought was very interesting and not that hard to pick up. Star Wars Clone Wars, I'm so familiar with Pandemic that this one was not as hard to pick up, but it was kind of different how they did it. They didn't do it in just the traditional Pandemic way, because they were adapting it to this universe. So the rules were a little bit took a little bit more time than a normal Pandemic game, at least for me in that regard. So in this case, I think I'm going to go with the 3 keys For What Remains, predominantly because of the way it adapted to the solitaire system, and the fact that you can interchange any one of these different sets and these different factions seamlessly. I thought that the rules were simple enough to get into that, and I thought that was a good innovation there. Next, I'm going to go with Space Federation, Space Infantry Federation, as the 2 keys. As I said, it took me a couple read-throughs to figure out what was going on, but it all kind of clicked once I understood how the icons worked, or how the pulling stuff out of the bag worked. Everything became pretty easy after that. And then Star Wars Clone Wars is a 1. Not that the rules are unclear, it's just that it was just different than what I would expected them to kind of take a different attack, I guess, knowing that this is a Pandemic system. Next, we come to value. Value is not only value, like what did you pay for it, how much you're going to play it, but it's also, in a war game sense, does it simulate the conflict or the situation or the historical event sufficiently? Also, it's a fun factor. Is it fun to play? Is it something that you will replay and want to play again? And in that regards, this one is kind of tough, because I've played all 3 of these multiple times, because they are that easy to get down and play and set up. There is a little bit of setup for each one of these 3. These aren't just a quick just throw out there. Even Star Wars: The Clone Wars takes a little bit of setup, laying out the map, but none of these are tedious, and none of them are so difficult to set up that it would detract from gameplay. So in this regard, as far as value is concerned, I'm going to probably put a 1 for Star Wars: The Clone Wars, not because it's not replayable or not a good game. It's just that I understand what they're doing in this space. And for me, I like Star Wars, I like the Clone Wars, but I'm not, a fanboy of that. I like that system, that world, that story, all that stuff, but it's not something I have to have on a constant basis. So it's not something I have to play. These other 2 basically are a little bit more interested for me. For What Remains has created its own world And I find that somewhat interesting to get into that world just as much as I did the Clone Wars. Infantry Federations is yet its own other world, and this is basically a takeoff of its solo tactical game. That's a very big game on called Space Infantry, and so it's playing in that world, so to speak. But this is at a very strategic or galactic level of play, and so I find the interest or the intrigue level for all three of these about the same. The IP just doesn't, I just don't automatically go to the IP and say that's what I got to play. So now we're down to what about who's going to get the 2 and who's going to get the 3 here. This one is really close. I'm going to give the 3 key to Space Infantry just because I like the Stage of Siege system, and I find that it's easier to lay this out and understand what I'm doing, and I have if I tend to have an itch for the kind of the strategic level play more than for what remains, and the solitaire play kind of takes it over the edge, because although this has a solitaire system, a very good solitaire system, there's more setup in not only setting this up, but there's more administrative stuff you have to do in going through its solitaire system than you do for the Space Infantry. It's all built in the Space Infantry. That's kind of how I'm going to lay them out. It'd be interesting to see how the keys come out. This is probably a pretty close one. So for Star Wars, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keys. For what remains, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys. And for Space Infantry, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keys. So I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 keys. I think for what remains wins out, nudges out Space Infantry. Very close race, very, very tight race here. I think that if you are wanting to explore the sci-fi space, you can't go wrong with any one of these 3. If you like the States of Siege and more of a strategic level, then Space Infantry might be your bag. If you really like the IP of Star Wars, the Clone Wars, and like the pandemic system, then definitely this is the way to go. And then for what remains is, if you really like tactical and almost miniature like rules and gameplay at that level, then this is the way to go in that space. So that's what I have for you today for New2Me, Sci-Fi in 2022. Part of Kilroy's Key 3. Thanks for stopping by. Love to know your point of view on any of these games or any other sci-fi games out there that didn't make it to my top 3 or just didn't make it to my list because maybe I didn't have them or maybe I didn't play them. So anyway, love to know your thoughts. Drop them down below. And hey, have a happy and safe New Year's Eve. Thanks for watching.